Hello friends! GTA 6 might end up being the most expensive video game ever made, or at least it's definitely starting to look that way. According to some estimates, the game's development costs are already somewhere between $1 and $1.5 billion. Now, to be fair, that number is still partially speculation, as IGN reported that the figure comes from analyst estimates based on comments from Take-Two CEO. Obviously, Strauss Zelnick hasn't come out and said, yes, GTA 6 costs $1 billion, or at least he hasn't just yet. What he has said is that the project is shaping up to be expensive. And yeah, if we're talking about $1 billion or more, expensive feels like a pretty gentle way to put it. To put that into perspective, the current crown for the most expensive game belongs to Star Citizen, at least when we're talking about development costs, because it's getting close to $1 billion in player funding. Then there is Monopoly Go, which also spent around $1 billion, although most of that money went into marketing and user acquisition. There are other huge examples too, of course. Most high-end AAA games usually land somewhere between $150 and $500 million. Some are on the lower end, like Spider-Man Miles Morales, which reportedly cost around $156 million. Others are much higher, like Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, which reportedly cost Activision staggering $700 million. But even then, nothing really comes close to the scale of GTA 6. And honestly, Take-Two and Rockstar are probably among the very few companies in the entire industry that could even attempt a budget like this and still make it work. Mostly because GTA 5 hit $1 billion in retail sales in just 3 days all those years ago. So there is already a precedent here. And that's before we even talk about how many people are waiting for GTA 6, or how much money it earned and still earning during its lifespan. For most companies, even massive ones like Blizzard or Activision, a $1 billion game would need a near perfect launch. And also it would need strong post-launch retention, barely any technical problems, and a huge amount of ongoing monetization to justify that kind of spend. But GTA is apparently just built different. When you have hundreds of millions of people waiting for the next entry, the math is just completely on a different level. That doesn't mean the game can be mediocre though, it still has to be incredible. If it isn't, Rockstar and Take-Two would be in serious trouble. What I'm really saying is that the budget this extreme only makes sense when the IP has things like historical performance, long-term durability, and proven ability to keep making money long after launch. And I'm pretty sure that once GTA 6 finally releases, a lot of companies are going to start rethinking what their own games should be. I also think GTA 6 could become a new benchmark for the absolute top end of AAA development. But that creates a pretty big problem. Most AAA studios do not have the capital to casually throw $1 billion at one project. So we might end up with an even bigger gap between games like GTA 6 and regular premium titles. Honestly, I would even go as far as saying we might be on the edge of a new category of games. What Ubisoft referred to in the past as quadruple A, something above even the biggest AAA projects we're used to. But that also means studios will probably get a lot more careful. Fewer mega projects will get green light, publishers will rely even more on proven IPs, and post-launch monetization will become even more important. Unless of course I'm completely wrong and GTA 6 somehow becomes the biggest flop in gaming history. But yeah, that seems to be pretty unlikely. Memory prices and supply shortages are still causing problems across the industry, and with that, Sony still isn't ready to talk about a launch window for its next-gen console. Insider Gaming recently shared comments on this from Sony's CEO, and from the sound of it, Sony might be fine when it comes to components in 2026, but even 2027 is still a concern. Memory prices are expected to stay high and supply shortages could still be an issue, so the console manufacturer has to be very careful about what it does next. Because of that, the company has once again said that it has not decided when the next console will launch, or what price it will launch at for that matter. So for now, Sony seems to be sticking with the same strategy: watch the market, wait, and adapt. We've also talked before about the possibility that Sony could push PS6 release window all the way to 2029. And on top of everything else, Sony's CEO also pointed out that active users on the platform are still growing. So really the company doesn't seem to be in any rush to move into the next generation. And their recent financial results basically support that too. All in all, it feels like the old version of the console wars is starting to shift. Instead of everyone fighting for the exact same audience in the same exact way, each platform holder seems to be moving in its own direction. Nintendo just released its next-gen handheld, and that is pretty much its own thing. Xbox is trying to reinvent itself and move beyond the traditional console box. Valve is trying to expand beyond being mainly a handheld-focused manufacturer with the Steam machine. And Sony, from the sound of it, is just standing back and saying, yeah, we're not ready to commit to anything yet. But to me, the biggest question is not really the date, it's the price. For example, the Switch 2 was 50% more expensive than the original Switch, and prices are still going up because of hardware shortages. Sure, every next-gen console is an upgrade, but still, the PS5 already launched with a pretty serious price tag, so if prices keep climbing, there is no telling how expensive the next generation could get. Either way, I am really worried about it. So, Mixtape launched recently, a short narrative game about a group of friends coming of age with a heavy focus on music and soundtrack, and yet somehow it has quickly become one of the most divisive games of 2026 so far. On one side, you have critics and major gaming outlets absolutely praising it. They're giving it extremely high scores and calling it fresh, revolutionary, and a new standard for games in that genre. Its Metacritic score is sitting at around 85 out of 100, and outlets like IGN, Insider Gaming, DualShockers, and others have been giving it near perfect or perfect scores. Steam reviews are also sitting at very positive, at least at the time of recording this. But then on the other side you have influencers, content creators, and just regular players saying the complete opposite. A lot of people on YouTube, Twitch, and X and other platforms are going after this game hard. The main criticism is that Mixtape barely has any gameplay. Some people are saying it can basically be completed without much player input at all. Others are saying the game is too short, the story doesn't work, the characters are hard to connect with, and overall it feels like something that should have been a movie instead of a game. Also, a lot of players are repeating the same accusation, that the developers somehow bought good reviews from major media outlets to justify a weak game. Now, I'm not saying that's true, I just simply don't know that for sure, but this whole situation does bring up a really interesting point. There is clearly a gap between what major outlets and critics value and what a lot of players think. First of all, I do think there is some hype involved here. I think a lot of influencers and content creators are trying to capitalize on the negative sentiment because negativity gets clicks and views. The whole system is kind of built for that now. Especially because if you look at Steam reviews and the concurrent player count, both seems to be relatively positive. But that is a whole other can of worms and I'm not getting into that today. That being said, I do think that people who criticize the review system have a point. There is a lot of distrust around game reviews, especially when it comes from major outlets. And that distrust has been building on for years, basically since game journalism became a big thing. So in that sense, yes, I do think the system is crooked. But also, we all kind of knew that already, right? I mean, a lot of industry is run by people who don't really seem to understand games at all and are mostly focused on the business side. And a lot of reviewers are either critics or journalists first, not necessarily gamers. And personally, I stopped paying attention to a lot of professional game reviews a long time ago. For the same reason, I don't really care about movie reviews. Because I think a lot of people who call themselves critics tend to do things like overvalue things like novelty, artistic ambition, and design elegance, while undervaluing comfort, fan service, power fantasy, and just plain fun. And that's before we even get into the smug attitude some critics have, or the fact that sometimes they don't seem to understand the genre they are reviewing. So my point in all that is simple. It is very hard to rely on anything you see on the internet these days. And honestly, you probably shouldn't. I have my own system and it hasn't really failed me yet. If I see a game that looks fun to me, I buy it, I play it, and I make up my own mind. That's exactly what happened with Dragon Age The Veilguard, for example. The internet was acting like it was so terrible, but I played it, had a great time, and formed my own opinion, instead of yelling at clouds about critics being bought or the internet being wrong. So yeah, when it comes to what games you should and shouldn't play, my advice is to trust your own gut more than the internet. The new Resident Evil has been out for a while now, and it looks like dataminers have been busy, because they have uncovered a bunch of content that was apparently cut from the final game. According to Insider Gaming, one dataminer recently posted a whole collection of unused mechanics, assets, and characters on X. That included things like the beloved merchant from the Resident Evil 4, complete with a full weapon customization screen. There was also a section where Leon and Grace act as a duo, some kind of blood collection kit, professional difficulty, and different ammo types that are not in the final game. Now, some people look at cut content and immediately see it as value lost. But honestly, I don't really see it that way. I've talked about this before, but this kind of thing happens all the time in game development. When a game is being actively built, teams throw around a ton of ideas and test what works. Sometimes they go pretty far with those ideas. They might build entire features, balance them, and get them working, but then they look at the actual game holistically and realize, you know what? This doesn't make sense anymore. And when that happens, cutting it is usually the right call. So to me, it isn't a value lost, it is a value gained. And the value is in improving the overall game by removing stuff that would hurt the pacing, the balance, tone, or experience. And honestly, I wish more developers had that kind of restraint, because I think most of us can name at least a few games that added weird systems or mechanics just for the sake of adding them. Not because they made the game better, but because they looked good in patch notes or something. My most recent example is the fishing mechanic in Diablo 4. If you haven't played it yet, you can now catch fish basically just to complete an in-game achievement. And that's it. You can't trade the fish, you can't use them in recipe, you can't catch anything else. You just catch the fish and the game records that you caught the fish. I know, right? Truly mind-blowing stuff. It feels like a mechanic added just so that the patch notes could say, hey, we've added one more feature. And to me, that brings zero real value. If it were up to me, I would have cut it completely and called it a day. So in this case, I'm actually glad Capcom seems to be judging the overall experience first, instead of obsessing over the value of every individual piece of content. And honestly, the results speak for themselves. While Arc Raiders seems to be dominating the extraction shooter space, other games are trying to figure out how to bring players back, and Arena Breakout Infinite seems to be thinking PvE might be the answer. This isn't actually the first time the game has tried removing PvP from the equation. Back in April, MoreFun Studios tested a limited time event that let players raid several maps without other players roaming around. At the time, there were some technical questions about how that kind of mode would work long term, but it looks like those issues have now been worked out. According to a new update from the head of MoreFun Studios, a permanent PvE mode could be ready as early as next season, which starts in July, and the reaction from players was mixed right away. Some people think this will pull the dev team's attention away from what they should really be doing, which is improving the core PvP mode. And I kind of get that argument, but considering the game has been losing players, I actually think this is a very smart move. Arena Breakout is already a pretty hardcore game. It definitely does not have the same lower barrier to entry that Arc Raiders seems to have. And PvE modes are usually much more approachable. They are more casual, less stressful, and lower stakes than traditional PvP. For newer or less competitive players, extraction shooters can be brutal. You can lose gear, lose time, and lose motivation before you even understand the basic systems, timings, and mechanics. PvE lowers that early failure pressure while still keeping the main loop intact. You still enter a raid, collect value, deal with various enemies, and try to extract. But you are not constantly getting deleted by players who already know every angle and timing on every single map. And there is another big point here too. Cheaters. Oh, I can talk for hours about cheaters. A lot of multiplayer shooters are struggling with them. And from my own experience, Arena Breakout is definitely not an exception. So a PvE mode gives frustrated players another option instead of making them leave the game entirely. And since the community actually voted for this mode to become permanent with over 84% in favor, I think a lot of the negative reception is probably louder than the silent majority who are really happy about it. Of course, whether the mode is actually good will depend on the execution. And yes, I do agree that the developers still need to improve the PvP side. But PvE is becoming less and less optional for extraction shooters, especially if a game wants to grow beyond the hardcore audience. So honestly, this is probably the best move MoreFun Studios could have made. Also, quick thing, if you don't know who I am, my name is Alex, I'm a game producer and I'm here to help you get caught up on everything that's going on in the video game industry. A former NetEase executive recently raised a serious amount of money and he decided to invest in multiple gaming projects. One of those projects is coming from the newly formed Breakout Studios led by Casey Hudson from BioWare, who are working on the new Star Wars game, The Fate of the Old Republic. According to Bloomberg, Simon Zhu, formerly of NetEase, recently started a new company called Greater Than Group. The company's model is to provide studios with funding, support, autonomy, and co-ownership alignment between Greater Than Group and founding teams. Basically, the goal is to help top creators focus on their dream projects while giving them the support they need to actually deliver those games. And Breakout Studios is one of the studios that caught their attention. Casey Hudson also shared some new details about his philosophy for this project. First, he talked about the scale of the game and said that bigger isn't always better. Apparently, he is not trying to make a game that's hundreds of hours long. Instead, he wants to focus on replayability, with players exploring different paths within the same storyline. And second, Hudson talked about AI. He said there will be no AI use on the project because he sees it as creatively soulless. And honestly, both of those decisions sounds pretty reasonable for a newly formed studio. A smaller, more focused version of The Fate of the Old Republic probably gives them a much better chance at maintaining quality. A lot of recent games has shown that great games usually aren't great because they have the biggest map or endless content. They're great because they have strong writing, meaningful content, and a polished experience. If the studio tried to chase hundreds of hours of content right away, the scope could spiral really fast. You would need more content, more QA, more narrative branching, more cinematics, and the list goes on. All that before the studio has even shipped its first game. So in this case, quality really does matter more than quantity. And with AI being such a controversial topic in games right now, distancing the project from it early is probably a good move too. At least now we know one thing for sure, this game probably isn't running out of funding anytime soon. So there is hope yet for Star Wars fans who are looking forward to this one. And that's all I have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about the industry consequences after GTA 6. What are your thoughts on Mixtape if you played it? And if the price is a big concern for you when it comes to next-gen consoles. As usual, if you want to know more, all links are down below. And of course, clicking the like button helps this channel a lot and I personally highly appreciate it. Thank you for making it this far. And with that, Alex is signing off for today. Cheers!